Hello, and welcome to week 4, I think, of the summer series. Well, week 4 for me. There have been some fantastic sessions this week already, and thanks so much to the team for stepping in whilst I've been away. I've been talking about it for ages. Officially married now, done in secret, just with our parents, social distance, very representative of the world that we live in right now. But nothing was going to stop me marrying Ivy, who Mrs. Manners now. So fantastic. As I say, thanks very much to the team stepping in and taking it all up whilst I've been away, and I've been catching up on those sessions. They've been fantastic. As it's Wednesday, we've got our free gig this week from LDN. We've got Joe and Ben who'll be performing for you later. Really excited to kick back and watch that as well. So to today's session, really important one around financial well-being. With it being quite common knowledge that a lot of people around the world are only one paycheck away from being in financial difficulties. This session is going to look at lessons from previous recessions and psychology to see what we can learn from that and try and not make the same mistakes and move forward. Taking us through this is a man who graduated in psychology, has been in the HR tech space for 20 years. He's authored an Amazon bestseller, A World of Good, Lessons from Around the World and Employee Experience. He's the Director of Wellbeing at Benefex. So please welcome Gethin Nadin. Hello. How are you doing?
I'm good, pretty good. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. So as usual, I'm going to shut up, leave you to it, and I'll come back in around 20-25 minutes and we'll have a chat.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So hi, everyone. So as almost every major economy is now in a pandemic-induced recession, the topic of financial well-being has become even more prevalent as HR teams and business leaders look at different ways to support their staff through what's inevitably going to be a really difficult time over the next couple of years. We saw the last recession decimate financial security for many employees, and as we enter another recession for a time that might be even worse than the last one. So I'm going to talk today about what we can learn from the last recessions to better prepare our employees so that they can weather whatever storm is coming. Matt gave me a great intro, but just a little bit about myself. So as Matt mentioned, I've been working in HR tech for almost 20 years. Top 100 global engagement influencer, listed on the engagement power list, and a few other different things there. I write and speak quite a lot about HR and financial well-being and well-being in general. So really excited to kind of have the opportunity to talk to you all about financial well-being. I think that's such an important part of well-being generally, and it touches so many different parts of the well-being spectrum. So it's something I'm really, really passionate about. As Matt mentioned as well, I've written a book. That book has got a little bit about well-being being a really important part of the employee experience. I zoned into how significant well-being was to those experiences we have at work, and why kind of 2 years after writing this book, I don't think well-being is a HR fad. I think it's going to become a really expected and important part of work for everybody. I think financial well-being is still massively overlooked by many employers. And as I mentioned, you know, when we're in a recession and employees are struggling, it's never more important. In 2009, following the last global recession, former White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel said, "You never let a serious crisis go to waste." And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things you think you couldn't do before. Coronavirus has given us a really good excuse to become more experimental. This forced experiment that we're all going through has allowed employers to try new things with varying degrees of success. And so I think as we enter a new recession, there are so many lessons we should have learned from the last that would have helped our employees better weather the inevitable financial stresses in life. And as employers around the world realize the significance of investing in well-being, today I'll touch upon kind of those recessions and also talk about, you know, those companies that embrace well-being and corporate social responsibility have been proven to have higher profitability and employee loyalty. But this is no longer enough for the everyday consumer. We're even now starting to see consumers are looking for those organizations that care for and employ their staff. Throughout the pandemic, we've seen, you know, lots of research have appeared to say that when you care for your employees, I'm more likely to want to buy from you as a consumer. And I think it's important for us to realize as well that as we go through this presentation, and I pick a few things out. If you see something you like, take a photograph of it, share it, tweet it. You know, I've put myself and BenFX's Twitter handles there if you see anything you like. But it's important for us to know that nobody really knows how quickly we're going to recover financially from this pandemic, and that will change based on what country you're in. But one thing's for sure, it takes quite a lot longer for us to recruit people than it does for us to let them go. So the significant job losses we've seen in the UK and the US will take some time to recover from. And so that means those people who get back into work, who've lost their jobs, are going to bring with them some empty savings accounts and increased debt. So this isn't a problem that's going to go away anytime soon. Money frequently tops the reasons why people around the world lose sleep. In 2020, before we even knew what coronavirus was, money was the #1 worry in the majority of employees' lives right across the world. Globally, money worries are responsible for almost 20% of suicides. In the US, it's been as much as 55% of male suicides due to economic reasons. Money is a really stressful part of everyone's lives. And as I speak now, you know, the UK, China, the US, Australia are all currently in the grip of the sharpest economic contraction since records began. And as I mentioned, kind of long before coronavirus was a thing, you take employees in the UK, for example, record high debts and stagnant savings habits. And like most of the world, we've just really recovered from the last recession and we're pretty ill prepared for another one. Earlier this year, 6 in 10 Brits say they regularly run out of money before payday, with more than half saying they could only go a month or less without having to borrow money if they lost their job. And a similar scenario was playing out all over the world. And then the pandemic hit and 85,000 Brits and 40 million Americans lost their jobs. So we were really ill prepared as individuals financially for this pandemic. And in the USA, American sense of well-being is at its lowest since levels in April since records began in 2008. Less than 1 in 2 Americans now say that they are thriving in their lives. We've seen 1/3 of Brits have their household income decrease as a result of the pandemic. And that's, again, quite significant. The pressure that's putting on people is going to be really significant for years to come. It's been reported that 25% of those under the age of 34 have been pushed further into debt because of the coronavirus pandemic. And now more than 1/3 of employees say they're suffering anxiety about their financial situation. And unfortunately, for most of us, that's going to get worse. UK Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak warned last month that the UK is heading into a recession of unprecedented scale. He said it isn't obvious that there will be an immediate bounce back, but some experts believe there might be. But either way, there's going to be a big impact on your employees. In April this year, something called the IHS Market Index in the UK fell from what was a record high just the month before to a record low. And as a result of that, most households are expected their financial well-being to decline over the next 12 months. And UK consumers in particular are expected to lose around £515 or about $600 a month in their discretionary spending because of the virus. So employees are going to need more support from their employer to make better decisions around how they make their money last. And even if the crisis hits us all equally, the evidence is emerging that the economic repercussions of the crisis are going to fall disproportionately on some of your employees. So young workers, low-income families, and women in particular are going to be the hardest hit. So something for employers to really be conscious of. The coronavirus pandemic has affected economies and countries have shut down, and the knock-on effect in countries like Canada, the US, South Africa, and the UK is that money worries are now the biggest well-being concern that's come out of the pandemic. So 1/3 Brits are worried about money than usual. Money has now become the leading cause of stress for Canadians. Almost 9 in 10 Americans say they are hounded by money worries because of the pandemic. And 2 in 5 people say they report an increase in financial anxiety. And so that is kind of huge. You know, the result of the pandemic, as a result of one of the largest health pandemics we've ever seen, money is the thing that people are most concerned about, which is quite surprising. Like, this is a physical thing that's happening to us, yet the resulting financial well-being concern is kind of bigger than the health concern itself. And so where we're at the moment is that employees need your help. There is little support elsewhere. There is lack of government support. Global employees have very limited number of places to go for financial support and assistance. And record numbers of employees and employers themselves now both agree that the workplace is where they want and need the support. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because it's where most people get their income. It's where they understand things like tax. But it's also the workplaces where they're making some pretty large financial decisions already around things like retirement, 401ks, pensions, and insurance. In the UK, 8.6 million people have seen their income fall over the last 5 months, and this has increased anxiety levels to about 16% higher than average. The proportion of Brits reporting low happiness has also risen sharply by almost 10% from the end of 2019 to the end of March. So again, really big effect on the mental health of your employees. And finance is the biggest worry for an estimated 5.3 million people in the UK. A new survey that's come out from the National Endowment for Financial Education found that nearly 9 out of 10 Americans say the crisis is causing immense personal stress on them and their finances. Really, really significant thing. And when we look at people like the Bank of England, we know from extensive research, as the Bank of England say, that financial worries are an important contributor to poor mental health. So when we think about the impact of the mental health is going to have because of the crisis, that's going to be compounded again by money worries. There is a very strong relationship between money worries and mental health. Money and mental health are directly linked. So employees who are committed to importing and supporting mental health must also support financial health. 1 in 5 people with a mental health condition are also in problem debt. You're significantly more likely to go into a position of poor financial well-being if you have poor mental health. And you're significantly more likely to develop a mental health problem if you have poor financial well-being. So I see financial well-being as such a significant contributor to any well-being strategy at work, because it plays such a significant part on other areas of well-being. And even if you take things like physical well-being, the stress and the worry and the anxiety about money worries takes its toll on us physically. It stops us from sleeping, it affects our diet, etc. So it's a really central part, I believe, to any workplace well-being strategy. And I guess what's interesting is when we look at the fact there's not much support elsewhere, employees actually don't have many people that they feel like they can trust with their money. I took this photograph at a Wired Money event conference last year, and this organization, Bud, looked at surveying people as to kind of, based on their income, who do they trust in society? And what their research found is that trust is pretty low, even in the places we didn't expect it to be, banks and even online financial services. And the results tell us that most people don't trust the institutions we should be trusting with our money, and we should be trusting to give us good kind of financial advice and financial education. So we don't trust their advice, we don't trust them, and in many cases, we don't really trust the technology. However, if we look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, which they produce a global index every year on institutional trust, and they ask people how much they trust things like the media, government, big business, etc. And consistently for a few years, all of the major 15 industries, financial services has remained the lowest. So financial services is the least trusted in the lives of employees all over the world. But the most trusted institution might surprise you. So it's been a 14% increase on last year's figures. In the US, that was a 15% increase. But for about 3 years running now, the employer has been the most trusted institution in the lives of employees. So while trust in almost every other area of employees' lives has dropped, trust in the employer has grown significantly. And the two figures on screen highlighted are the US and UK, and you can see that actually in around 75 on average percent of the world now trust their employer. I think that's pretty significant. When it comes to the kind of the hearts and minds and the things that employees care and worry about, they trust you, their employer, to help. And I think that's just so significant that actually you're the person they trust to help them where they don't trust anyone else. And so it's kind of no surprise with that in mind and with the pandemic that we've lived through and are still living through, that despite well-being being sat at the top of the HR and CEO agenda, more employers now realize the moral and commercial reasons for looking after the well-being of their employees. And something kind of odd happened when countries around the world locked down, and that was employers brought forward and invested more in employee well-being. So as millions of employees started working from home, employers wanted to support this sudden drastic change in their lives and were really worried about the mental health concerns and the financial concerns caused by the pandemic. Employees are now more likely to say that their employer should help them with their well-being, especially when it comes to financial well-being, than they did before the pandemic. As a result of the pandemic, employees are also demanding more support from their employer. It's estimated today in a new report that's come out that 50% of employees say they're going to be looking for a new role once the pandemic is over, with many of those employees citing that the poor support and care offered by their employer throughout the crisis is a reason that they wanted to leave. You can see on screen almost half of employees feel their employer didn't offer the benefits or programs to support them during challenging times. So people are really wanting to see that support. And I think coronavirus has shown a light on those employers that aren't there to care and support their employees whilst they're struggling. And we can see in the UK, the reason the UK government was so quick to support wage subsidies is that employees were only just managing before the crisis hit. We had the weakest decade of real wage growth since the 19th century, and that left millions of workers just one payday away from significant money problems. And we can think about ourselves. How long could we sustain our household if we were to stop earning income? If you're like most Americans, the answer is not very long. Only 40% of Americans can afford an unexpected expense of $1,000. And in fact, nearly 80% of workers are living paycheck to paycheck. So it's no surprise the probability of an economic recession brought on by the coronavirus has caused so many of us to worry. 2 in 5 people who work for large companies reported an increase in financial anxiety, and employees are getting more wellness concerns because of money worries and less income. So again, the issue's not going to go away. It's going to be compounded as people settle into, job retention scheme. When that ends in the UK, for example, are we going to see more people lose their job? And the expectation is that's going to happen. And although it might not directly affect one of your employees, it will affect their family members, their husbands, wives, and partners. So the financial strain will be seen by your employees, even if they're not subjected to some of those kind of pandemic-induced problems. And as I mentioned before, this global pandemic hit the world, and yet the biggest wellness concern wasn't physical, it was financial. The long-term impact on employees' money is harming retirement as well. So we can start to see that 20% of employees say that they've reduced pension contributions or withdrawn money from their retirement savings or 401ks. So we're going to inherit those problems further down the line. Too few people were prepared for the pandemic. And I love this quote from a director of Mental Health Foundation that says, we have very concerning evidence that many millions of people in the UK are worrying about fundamental financial matters and their job security, both of which are closely linked to poor mental health. So for all those employers that want to take mental health seriously, we've got to take the financial situation of our employees seriously now. Otherwise, those problems are just going to get worse and worse. But even as the new normal life that we've gotten used to beds in a little bit, we've started to see some spikes in employee well-being and anxiety rises. So the virus had an impact on the lives of employees, but actually what we're starting to see is that as we've kind of got used to that lockdown life, more and more employees are experiencing more anxiety. So actually, as you got together as employers and you started to support your employees, we've actually started to see a spike again in anxiety as people kind of worry about the long-term impact on the economy and the long-term impact on them past the couple of months that we possibly thought lockdown was going to last. And what's interesting is although lots of employers reacted to the demand from their employee and started to invest in care and well-being of their staff, we've seen just earlier this month data show that that's starting to wane, and a fifth more employees are now more likely to say their organization doesn't care about their well-being than at the start of lockdown. So that initial commitment from employers to offer support is fading pretty fast. And that's a big mistake because employees are demanding that their employees support them more. And as I mentioned before, if they don't get that support, as soon as they're able to, they're going to go to an employer that's going to help them with that. And that growing trend of well-being over the last few years has started to see that people want to work for more supportive and caring employers, and that has just ballooned since coronavirus. So more and more employees are taking their well-being seriously, and they're demanding more support from those that employ them. We can see with the data on screen, more than half of employees believe their employer didn't show enough concern for their mental health during lockdown. Nearly half of workers say that their relations improved among the crisis because their employers cared for them. And 60% of professionals feel inspired to work for an employer who looks after their people during unprecedented times. So employees really want to and will gravitate towards the employers that look after them when things get difficult. And with employees struggling to find the education they need from the government, they are turning to employers for help. 3/4 of employees think their employers should help them with their finances. And almost 100% of employers themselves agree that they're responsible for improving employee health behaviors. Our parent company, Zealous, did some research recently and found that 88% of workplace financial well-being, 88% of employees who said if they have workplace financial help, it will have a positive impact on their current situation. 98% of employers admit that financial well-being impacts their business through productivity and engagement. And almost 80% of employees now expect their employer to help them with their financial well-being. So the message is getting through that more and more employers have a responsibility and should be helping their staff. But we saw something interesting happen during the pandemic as well. If you look at data from LinkedIn and social media companies, when employers posted about how they're supporting their people, that led to further and longer engagement in social media over time. So we started to see that actually online, people started to gravitate towards employers who were helping their staff. Social media posts related to COVID-19 got much more attention, especially when they were focused on how companies are helping their people. Consumers and employees were looking out for those organizations that were doing good during this crisis. And we saw a rapid desire from consumers to buy from those organizations who were supporting their staff. And as a result of that, almost half of under 40s and almost half of the under 50s say loyalty to their employer is now influenced by how much their company cared about their financial well-being. And that was a large study by PwC. So 50% of the people that are looking to leave your business could be affected by you being able to support them more as we get through this pandemic. And I think we started to realize as well now that this is an investment in our people. Over the last few years, the UK and US governments have realized the importance of employee well-being, not just because of the individual impact it has, but because of the impact it has on society. And the HM Treasury, the FCA, and the Federal Reserve in the US said that employees need more help with their financial well-being, and they found clear links between well-being and productivity. And so we've got governments now driving employers to do more. And the evidence is telling us that when employees are overwhelmed, they shut down. And when they're overwhelmed and stressed and worried, they take more sick days, they turn up to work less, and they're less productive. And so that starts to have a really big impact on the bottom line through absenteeism, presenteeism, and it's kind of, and turnover as well. These are really big costs to the business, and we can have a big impact on those things. And Deloitte, in their recent report, suggested that there's evidence for every £1 invested in supporting financial well-being, employers can see a return of £3.50. So this is not a cost to the business. This is an investment, and employers really need to think about it in that way. And I also think we have an opportunity through financial well-being of making life a bit more equal for our employees. The pandemic and life is affecting us all differently. The last recession and the next recession won't impact all employees equally. And our diverse employees will have different life experiences that translates to their financial positions too. 62% of the LGBTQ plus community face very specific financial challenges. 25% of people in the LGBTQ plus community say their gender or sexuality has an impact on their finances. Women are 4 times less likely to self-educate themselves on financial matters, and significantly more women said they've never paid their credit cards in full in the past 6 months. And research shows that Black Americans' knowledge of saving and investing significantly lags behind whites. In November 29, the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center at George Washington University found that African Americans answered just 38% of joint personal finance questions correctly, in comparison to 55% answered by whites. And Ken Fraser, the first African American man to lead a major pharmaceutical company, he's the CEO of American Co., said that education was critical, that it was a great equalizer in our society. So if we really want to make life better for our diverse employees, it's time for us to take action as well. And just as I run towards the end, I just wanted to kind of give you a few tips on what we should be focusing on. Borrowing money should be a last resort for employers. Employees can be tempted to borrow money at a time when they wouldn't because of low rates or smaller amounts. There's a growing trend in the UK and the US to offer employees access to money through their employer. And I think employers should really tread carefully. The latest research that came out in 2020 shows that by giving people access to extra credit, it significantly increases the chances that they will use it. So allowing employees access to their pay earlier may very well encourage them to do this and spend more money than they would. Offering them loans, etc., can significantly increase the chance that they will take that loan even when they don't need it. And what the research is telling us people are doing is using their rainy day fund as kind of discretionary spending and viewing that line of credit as their rainy day fund. So if they need it, I can just apply for that loan through my employer, or I can advance my salary. So it's starting to form some pretty bad habits. I think we should also encourage, wherever possible, the creation of a savings buffer. The ability to cope with financial hardship ultimately means that the economy recovers faster. So when the bills are being paid, the banks, utilities, and grocery stores can keep their doors open. So on a personal and national level, maintaining solid savings is one of the best cures for economic woes. And invest in financial education. Financial services firms were told by the OECD at the last recession that they must let consumers understand their products better. They wanted financial literacy to be a big part of consumer finance. We have evidence from 126 different studies to show that financial education significantly impacts financial behavior. The Bank of England have told us the less financially literate tend to face higher debt costs than those people and often face more financial distress. When we look at financial education that's taught in schools, we can see in US states that require financial literacy, there's about 21 of them, their average credit card debt is lower and adults have higher credit scores and lower loan default rates than those in states that don't have that as an education. I'm going to skip forward a few slides just because of time. We'll make these slides available to you. And what we can start to see is actually younger people are being more subjected to fraud than any other generation. So the idea that old people get conned out of their money has gone out of the window. At the start of COVID-19, the GCHQ and the National Cyber Security Centre in the UK published very rare advice, which was to people to spot scams that would happen because of coronavirus. The whole virus made a remarkable change in digital behaviour. Right across the UK, 6 million more people downloaded a banking app for the first time ever. That equates to about 12% of working adults. And that has left more people open to fraud because they don't have the skills and the knowledge to use some of these digital tools that are available. And we can see when it comes to financial education, most HR and reward professionals believe that it's the best way to help with financial well-being. Financial advisors in the US say that it's one of the best things to do for their for their customers. And when those people have financial education at work, they say it's helping in 82% of the time. And again, as a result of the pandemic, the OECD have said that even in the absence of the crisis, developments in financial markets, demographics, economic and policy changes all point to the importance of financial education. And if we look to the last recession to see how much financial illiteracy contributed to it, we can actually see that it had a big impact on the last recession. We know that when financial literacy is higher, people borrow less, and in countries where borrowing is less, recessions do not last as long or go as deep. So this isn't just about the individual or the organization. It's quite a significant impact on society. And Austin Gooselby from the University of Chicago says that during a recession, financial literacy becomes unbelievably important. And a gentleman called Ben Bernanke from the Brookings Institute, who was working in the White House during the last recession, said that among the lessons that we had is the recent financial crisis is the need for everybody to acquire basic knowledge of finance and economics. And so if you really care about employee well-being, if you really care about mental health, then you have no choice but to start taking financial well-being seriously. Money frequently tops the list of what keeps people awake in 2020, and worrying about money is more stressful to employees than their jobs and relationships. So as we approach 2021, the significant opportunity, I think, lies with employers to not just make a difference to their employees and their organization, but to also have a positive impact on society and address some of the inequalities that exist because of poor financial literacy and low levels of financial education. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. As always, so far in the summer series, I don't know where to begin with, what to ask or to comment on, really. I suppose the last one, would be during the last session, financial institutions are talking about being more literate. That they probably should start with themselves, I think, because a lot of that. and one of the big words we've been using around equality and equity is accountability. And I think that a few more of those guys could have been held more accountable in the last session. But that's 2008, and we're in 2020 right now. So straight to financial literacy. Who should be responsible for that then? Should employers take that upon themselves? Because I suppose I feel like I have quite a good an understanding of it. But so you could have different levels of training, or I'm trying to think about who should be doing that to help our people.
So if the reality is the burden of this has fallen on the shoulders of employers because it's worrying people's lives, right? So yeah. It doesn't matter if somebody's got poor mental health at work. It doesn't really matter what's caused that. If it's they're going through a divorce or death of a loved one, whatever it might be, they're bringing that to the workplace. And for 50 years, we've tried to blur the lines between home and work. And so we're dealing with those issues. We've asked people to bring that stuff to work. And so the reality is if you feel like it's not your responsibility to help with financial well-being or improving financial literacy, it's affecting your business. The stats I went through, it's affecting the productivity. People are taking, almost an average of 3 days off a year. You start tapping in that app, you start making those calculations, and it's a significant cost to the employer. So even if you don't think it's your responsibility to do it, it's affecting your work, and it's costing you money to do it. And I think the research tells us that employees want this at work because they do trust their employer. They do think it should be delivered at work because money is the reason all of us go to work fundamentally.
So in the first instance, would it be more of a groups sessions where doing education pieces around different parts of financial literacy, and then you're offering more personal one-to-one elements too? Because I'm just thinking some people, it's a highly personal subject, isn't it?
And in most economies, there is a stigma attached to it. So people don't want to come and speak to you as an employer to say, look, I'm worried about debt, or I'm in debt. But I think we can create cultures where we can talk about that. We're starting to remove the stigma around mental health. We can start to remove the stigma around money. And I think the reality is there are some really shocking pieces of research and stories of employees, kind of young men and women who have killed themselves over very small amounts of debt. You're literally talking £100 and £1,000 and less. And some of those stories have been made into documentaries. I don't believe there's a HR person watching this who, if somebody was struggling in their organization and wanted to kill themselves because they owed £1,000, you wouldn't, as an employer, want to solve that problem. So we've got to create cultures whereby someone can come to you and say, I'm worried about money, and this is why, so that you can step in and do something. But also, pensions are, in this country, in the UK, pensions are massively misunderstood, despite the huge amount of investment that employers make. So again, there's a responsibility on the employer side that you're spending so much money on these benefits. Why aren't you helping people to understand them so they get the full value?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think it'll be one of the highest reasons for worry, I think, throughout my whole life. But I remember in my early 20s in Australia, it was definitely the #1 cause of stress was where my next rent was coming from. But that's not another matter. Money worries and being the #1 cause of anxiety right now, as you communicated, and us, a lot of us who are lucky to have jobs staying at home. Is that the perfect storm for bad mental health or mental well-being? And I know I'm asking you a question that not a single leader around the world is able to answer right now. So it's more of a conversation. But should we be looking to try and bring back people to work responsibly, to actually, because the bigger issue might be not being able to socialize with others and actually share those issues you might be able to share with colleagues that you wouldn't necessarily do over Zoom or on the phone?
Yeah, I think it's all about choice. I think everything to do with a great employee experience is about the individual and what they are comfortable with, what they want and what they need. I've worked from home for 10 years, so this is kind of business as usual in some respects. But I know friends who just want to get back to the office because that's a large part of their social life, was the people they spent time with in the office. Yeah. I know people whose mental health has got better because they've homeworked. I know people whose mental health has got worse because they're home working. Yeah. And so if you give people the option to, and you kind of focus on the results rather than where they're working from, I think you make a really good go of what has been a really forced experiment on working from home. And I think those organizations that allow people to build work around their lives will see higher loyalty, better commitment, higher productivity, and higher engagement.
And to one of the things you mentioned at the beginning was money worries being the leading cause of stress. Do you think that could be conflated into actual overall job security? Are they worried about money because they think they might lose their job? And should leaders be more transparent around what's going on within the business to give them that sense of control with their job, and therefore take that worry away from it a little bit?
Yeah, so a little bit. At the start of the year, money worries topped the list of what people worried about. And that was after 40 years worth of high employment rates in the UK and the US. Yeah. So people weren't worried about losing their jobs. In fact, people were able to just, if the job wasn't working out, pretty easily get on LinkedIn and find another job and move. Now, that for a period of time is going to disappear, that choice, because of the way the pandemic has affected the world. So all we've done is taken a really big problem and compounded it even further by forcing people to take pay cuts, by putting people on furlough at 80% of salary, by reducing their pay by up to 50% in some of my friends' lives. So although all around the world you've seen people spend less because they're not going out as much, generally speaking, there's been the income divide that we have between the haves and the have-nots has just got bigger. And the people who've got spare money at the moment are the people that had spare money at the start of the year. So actually, when you look at the job losses, especially in this country and the US, they're disproportionately affecting people in the service industry that are the lower paid. So you're compounding that inequality even more. And so I think it is compounding the problem, but the problem was here a long time before coronavirus came.
Yeah. I also think like monthly pay is archaic. I know I've never been able to manage a month to month when I know colleagues in Australia and America get paid week to week, and I find that a much easier way to manage your money from 5 to 7 days than 30 days. But I just wondered a quick question with the lowest well-being rating being published. There was the highest employee engagement rating came out of Gallup the other day. I'm just wondering, that doesn't really compute, does it? That the well-being is at its lowest, but apparently engagement's going up. Or is that just because people feel like they have to say they're engaged with work right now because they're worried about the job?
Well, I think what we've done is, as soon as pandemic hit, all of employers around the world just kind of went, oh shit, we've got to care for our people because they're not here. I can't look after them. I know they're worrying about something. Yeah. And so overnight, employers over-indexed on communications. They started helping people with their mental health. They made some pretty big benefits purchases. So, we saw 2/3 of employers increase their benefit spend as a reaction to the pandemic. So overnight, every employer, or most employers, started acting really caring towards their people. They had emails and messages from their CEOs that they'd never seen before. They had weekly updates. They had people phoning them, asking if they're okay, which they'd never had before. And so I thought, as soon as that happened, everyone was a bit like, do you know what? When it comes to the crunch, my employer was there for me. And when I see my friends, I see that they didn't get those things in their company, I started to realize that my employer really does care. And one of the stats I pulled out in the presentation was that started to dip earlier this month, because as we got used to it, employers started thinking, oh, we don't need those weekly updates anymore. I don't need to send the emails I've been sending. We're getting used to this new way of life for a time being. And it started to dip. But I think that it's a massive, massive lesson in us that people want you to take care of them. They want to know you've got their back. And when that happens, they'll work harder for you. And it just kind of makes sense that why wouldn't you work for a caring employer? And if you're an employer, why wouldn't you care for people? They're your biggest spend. So why not look after them and make them happy? Because they'll produce great things for you.
And I think even more now than ever, that those that don't aren't doing it as a reaction but want to continue it because they know they should, they're going to stand out even more. That was one of my biggest concerns at the beginning, was people starting to trust their people, empowering their people, giving them the tools they need to do their job because they have to. Will they continue to do that because they want to? And let's hope the majority of companies do. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Given so much food for thought here, and I don't think it'll be the last time we have a chat. I know you're having quite a few chats with a lot of people, imparting your knowledge around the world. So we're all very grateful to you, Gethin, for that. But Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess there's a lot in there, and I kind of rushed towards the end. I think I'm guilty of being able to talk for hours on this thing, and I'm not sure how interesting that would make an online event. But if anyone wants a slide or ask any questions about the research that I quoted, kind of reach out to me. But I think the evidence is there, right? Employee well-being is being affected quite significantly by financial well-being. That's affecting mental health. People are really struggling, whether you think it or whether you see it in your organization or not. People are struggling with money. And forget coronavirus. So even if that didn't happen, I would be telling you the same thing. Where you are in the world, people are struggling. People are living paycheck to paycheck in like 50% of the cases. And it doesn't discriminate by the amount of money you earn. There are debt charities in the US that are reporting significant increase in people calling them that earn six-figure salaries. Because people, anyone who's had a pay rise, you just kind of stretch into it and that becomes your life.
You do.
And just because you earn a lot of money, it doesn't mean you understand money. It doesn't mean you're making the right decisions with it. I spend money I haven't got on things I don't need all the time. Yet I tell people all this stuff. So even with me knowing it, I still don't follow that advice because it's quite difficult. And I think it's really important that employers just do whatever they can. You don't have to spend huge amounts of money to try and solve this problem, but just helping your people in whatever way you can, even if it's just making a better job of understanding the benefits that you make available to them now. And that's certainly something we saw during the pandemic. Almost overnight, our customers and prospects kind of said, oh, Gethin, that stuff you've been talking about well-being for 2 years, we need to get on that now. And so I've been really busy, one of the busiest periods of my working life, I would say, because all of a sudden everyone's on top of well-being. And my challenge for people like me is going to be exactly as you said, how do we keep that to the top of the agenda going forwards? When the pandemic dies and we go back to life as normal, how do we make sure that that well-being doesn't get taken off the list? And I think for employers, they really need to see that this is an investment. It is not a cost. The evidence is there, is clear. I've mentioned some of it in this presentation. If you invest in employee well-being, you will get that money back 3- or 4-fold. There are very few areas of your business where you'll get your money back that many times over. And like I say, the research is really compelling that if you invest in this stuff, aside from the fact that you'll get better employees who are more loyal to you, kind of more engaged with you, you'll see the monetary returns as well.
Yeah, no, I think that was the £1 you were making £3.50 back. I think that was the absolutely. And I think repetition is important in these times as well. And thank you so much. What I want to repeat is something we mentioned about 2-3 months ago, coming out of North America, a campaign about asking your people and friends, colleagues, rather than just asking how are you right now, saying how are you really, because adding the really will make them want to respond a bit more than just, you can bat away a how are you, but how are you really is a really great way of getting to something that matters. And I think we all need to be asking our friends and colleagues that every day. So thank you so much, Gethin. Like you say, we'll put all your contact details on the Inspiring Workplaces website and the story that this video appears. If you're watching on demand, you'll know what we mean already. For now, I want to say thank you very much. And we're going to, because we do think work is blurred right now, we want to try and bring some joy and fun into your home or office. So we've got a gig coming up. So we're going to say goodbye to Gethin. Thank you.
Thank you very much.